Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin stands as one of the most influential and controversial political figures of the 21st century. Born on October 7, 1952, in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, Putin has shaped Russian politics and international relations for over 2 decades. His journey from a KGB officer to the president of the Russian Federation represents a remarkable trajectory that has profoundly impacted global geopolitics. Putin's early life was marked by the hardships of post-World War II Soviet Russia. He was born to Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin and Maria Ivanovna Putina in a communal apartment in Leningrad. His father was a factory worker and served in the Soviet Navy, while his mother worked various jobs. The family had experienced tremendous loss during the siege of Leningrad, where Putin's older brother Viktor died during infancy. Growing up in the austere environment of Soviet Russia shaped Putin's worldview and instilled in him a sense of discipline and resilience that would characterize his later political career. As a young man, Putin was drawn to the world of intelligence and espionage. He studied law at Leningrad State University, graduating in 1975. During his university years, he was recruited by the KGB, the Soviet Union's main security agency. This marked the beginning of a career that would span 16 years in intelligence work. Putin served in various capacities within the KGB, including a posting to East Germany from 1985 to 1990, where he was stationed in Dresden. His work involved gathering intelligence and monitoring foreign nationals. The experience in East Germany proved formative, giving him insight into international affairs and the mechanics of state security. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was a pivotal moment in Putin's life and career. He has described the dissolution of the USSR as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, a statement that reveals much about his political philosophy and objectives. Following the end of the Soviet era, Putin returned to Leningrad, which had been renamed St. Petersburg, and entered the world of local politics. He worked in the administration of Anatoly Sobchak, the mayor of St. Petersburg, initially heading the city's liaison office with foreign investors and later becoming deputy mayor. Putin's rise to national prominence began in 1996 when he moved to Moscow to join the presidential administration under Boris Yeltsin. He quickly climbed the ranks, serving in various positions, including director of the Federal Security Service, the successor organization to the KGB. In August 1999, President Yeltsin appointed Putin as prime minister, a surprising choice given his relative obscurity at the national level. Just months later, on December 31, 1999, Yeltsin resigned and named Putin as acting president, setting the stage for what would become one of the longest leaderships in modern Russian history. Putin won his first presidential election in March 2000, campaigning on promises to restore order and rebuild Russian power after the chaotic 1990s. The Yeltsin years had been characterized by economic turmoil, political instability, and the rise of powerful oligarchs who wielded enormous influence over the Russian economy and politics. Putin positioned himself as the leader who would bring stability and restore Russia's standing on the world stage. His early presidency focused on consolidating power, reining in the oligarchs who challenged his authority, and reasserting federal control over Russia's regions. One of the defining features of Putin's leadership has been the centralization of political power. He systematically worked to bring regional governors under federal control, reformed the parliament to reduce opposition influence, and exerted pressure on independent media outlets. The Russian political system under Putin has been characterized by what many observers describe as managed democracy, where elections occur, but genuine political competition is limited. Opposition figures have faced significant obstacles, including legal challenges, media restrictions, and in some cases, violence. The economic landscape of Russia transformed significantly during Putin's tenure. The early 2000s saw substantial economic growth, driven largely by rising oil and gas prices. Russia is one of the world's largest producers of energy resources, and the commodity boom brought increased revenue that Putin used to pay down debt, build up reserves, and increase social spending. This economic growth contributed to Putin's popularity among many Russians who saw their living standards improve after the hardships of the 1990s. However, the Russian economy remained heavily dependent on natural resources, and efforts to diversify proved challenging. Putin's foreign policy has been assertive and aimed at restoring Russia's influence as a major global power. He has consistently pushed back against what he perceives as Western encroachment on Russia's sphere of influence, particularly the expansion of NATO into Eastern Europe. The 2008 war with Georgia over the breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia marked an early military intervention under Putin's leadership. Russia recognized these regions as independent states, a move condemned by much of the international community. This conflict signaled Putin's willingness to use military force to advance Russian interests in what Moscow considers its near abroad. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 represented a major turning point in Russia's relations with the West. Following political upheaval in Ukraine that ousted a pro-Russian president, Russian forces occupied Crimea, and the territory was formally annexed after a controversial referendum. The international community largely condemned this action, with the United States and European Union imposing economic sanctions on Russia. Putin defended the annexation by citing historical ties and the protection of Russian speakers, but the move violated international norms regarding territorial integrity and sovereignty. The conflict in eastern Ukraine that followed has resulted in thousands of deaths and displaced millions of people. Putin's leadership style combines elements of authoritarianism with populist appeals to Russian nationalism and traditional values. He has positioned himself as a defender of Russian civilization against what he portrays as the decadent and declining West. Messaging resonates with segments of the Russian population who feel humiliated by the loss of superpower status after the Soviet collapse. Putin has also aligned himself with the Russian Orthodox Church, presenting himself as a defender of conservative social values in contrast to what he characterizes as Western liberal excess. The domestic political environment in Russia under Putin has seen the suppression of opposition voices. High-profile critics have faced imprisonment, exile, or worse. The poisoning and subsequent imprisonment of opposition leader Alexei Navalny drew international condemnation and highlighted the risks faced by those who challenge Putin's rule. Independent media outlets have been shut down or forced to operate in exile. Civil society organizations, particularly those receiving foreign funding, have been labeled as foreign agents and subjected to restrictions. These actions have drawn criticism from human rights organizations and democratic governments around the world. Putin's international relationships have been complex and strategic. He has cultivated ties with China, seeing in Beijing a partner in challenging American dominance of the international system. The relationship between Russia and China has deepened considerably, with increased economic cooperation and coordination on global issues. Putin has also engaged with leaders across the political spectrum, from authoritarian regimes to democratic governments, demonstrating a pragmatic approach to international relations focused on advancing Russian interests. The role of information and propaganda has been central to Putin's governance. State-controlled media outlets present a narrative that supports the government's positions and portrays Putin as a strong leader defending Russia against hostile forces. Russia has been accused of using disinformation campaigns to influence politics in other countries, including allegations of interference in the 2016 United States presidential election. These allegations have been the subject of extensive investigations and have contributed to deteriorating relations between Russia and Western democracies. Putin's personal image has been carefully cultivated over the years. He has been photographed engaging in various activities designed to project strength and vigor, from riding horses shirtless to practicing martial arts. This image building serves to reinforce his authority and appeal to Russian cultural values that prize strength and decisiveness in leadership. At the same time, Putin maintains an aura of mystery about his personal life, with limited information available about his family and private affairs. The constitutional changes implemented in 2020 allowed Putin to potentially remain in power until 2036 by resetting his term limits. This move was presented to the Russian public through a referendum that approved a package of constitutional amendments. Critics argued that the changes undermined democratic principles and entrenched authoritarian rule, while supporters claimed they provided stability and continuity. The amendments also included provisions on traditional values, the primacy of Russian law over international law, and other measures that reflected Putin's political agenda. Russia's military capabilities have been a priority under Putin's leadership. Significant resources have been devoted to modernizing the armed forces and developing new weapon systems. Putin has publicly touted advanced weapons technology, including hypersonic missiles and other systems designed to counter Western military advantages. The military reforms aim to create a more professional and capable force, moving away from the conscript-based model of the Soviet era. However, the effectiveness of these reforms has been questioned by military analysts. The COVID-19 pandemic presented challenges for Putin's leadership. Russia developed its own vaccine, Sputnik V, which was promoted internationally as an alternative to Western vaccines. However, the pandemic also exposed weaknesses in Russia's healthcare system and led to significant economic disruption. Putin's approval ratings showed some decline during this period, though he maintained substantial support among the Russian population. In February 2022, Putin ordered a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a decision that has had profound consequences for Russia, Ukraine, and the world. The invasion was justified by Putin through various arguments, including claims about NATO expansion, the need to protect Russian speakers, and the denazification of Ukraine. The international response included severe economic sanctions, military aid to Ukraine, and widespread condemnation. The conflict has resulted in enormous casualties and destruction, triggered a major humanitarian crisis with millions of refugees, and reshaped European security dynamics. The economic impact of the war and sanctions has been significant for Russia. Western countries imposed unprecedented sanctions targeting Russian banks, companies, and individuals. Russia's economy contracted, though not as severely as some predicted, partly due to continued energy exports. However, the long-term economic outlook became more uncertain as Russia faced technological isolation and reduced access to international markets. The sanctions also accelerated Russia's pivot toward Asia and efforts to reduce dependence on Western economies. Putin's legacy is contested and will likely be debated for generations. Supporters credit him with restoring Russian stability and power after the chaos of the 1990s, improving living standards for many Russians, and standing up to Western pressure. Critics condemn his authoritarian governance, suppression of democracy and human rights, military aggression, and failure to modernize the Russian economy beyond resource extraction. The full consequences of his decisions, particularly regarding Ukraine, continue to unfold. Understanding Putin requires examining the historical context of post-Soviet Russia, the security concerns that shape Russian strategic thinking, and the political culture that enables authoritarian leadership. Putin emerged from the ruins of the Soviet collapse with a mission to restore Russian greatness and prevent further decline. His methods have included centralizing power, using energy resources as geopolitical tools, challenging Western dominance, and appealing to Russian nationalism. Whether these strategies ultimately serve or harm Russian interests remains a fundamental question. The international community continues to grapple with how to respond to Putin's Russia. Balancing the need to counter aggression and uphold international law with avoiding catastrophic escalation presents ongoing challenges. The war in Ukraine has demonstrated both the limits and the resilience of the international order established. After World War II, how this situation evolves will depend on military developments, economic pressures, political changes within Russia, and the resolve of countries supporting Ukraine. As Putin continues to lead Russia, his decisions shape not only his country's future, but also global security and stability. The path he has chosen has led to confrontation with much of the international community, economic hardship, and military conflict. Whether this represents a sustainable strategy or a path toward Russia's further decline is among the most important geopolitical questions of our time. The coming years will reveal much about Putin's ultimate impact on Russia and the world, as the consequences of his quarter-century in power continue to unfold across multiple dimensions of international affairs.